What's up, everybody? Welcome into the 247 Sports College Basketball Show. I'm your host, Adam Finkelstein, and we have got a fun show for you here this week. I'm going to be joined by my partner in crime very frequently, Isaac Trotter, the national college basketball writer for both CBSSports.com as well as 247Sports.com. And we are going to be breaking down his top 10 teams in the country for next year's college basketball season. So without further ado, let's welcome Isaac into the show. Trotter, what's up, my man? So I want to be very clear. The portal is closed. We know who's coming back from the draft. And so I think it is finally now appropriate to do a preseason top 10, top 25. I don't want to say what you did earlier was just a shot in the dark. But at least now we know a lot more. And the reality is you had to do it early because fans want to see it. But now I think we've got some information here to go by. So I will say this. Anyone who has an issue with this order, who thinks it's wrong, who thinks it's stupid, you were going to want to find Isaac _Trotter on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. And this is his list. And I'm just going to try and throw some curveballs at him. So Trotter, we're going to start. We're going to go 10-1. Let's start with the hate early on. Tell Duke Nation why you have Jon Scheyer's club all the way down at number 10.
Yeah, it's more just losing Cedric Coward at the draft decision was kind of a bigger blow. You know, I think he had a very, very high ceiling of what I thought he could bring to this group. And so then you're able to supplant that with Dame Sarr, who I'm really excited about, right? I think it looks like their Sion James replacement. But I think we have to change our expectations just a tad with the Blue Devils, right? When you're talking about a potential starting lineup that could feature, 4 underclassmen, right? If you go with Isaiah Evans, Dame Sarr, Cameron Boozer, and Patrick Gongba. So I think all of the things we've talked about with Duke throughout this entire cycle, the roster building cycle, still makes sense. They have terrific positional size. They have great depth. I think that they're going to have really, really good front court play. I think Cam Boozer is going to walk in and be like a 17-8 guy at minimum for Duke next year. Sarr is going to be terrific defensively. Isaiah Evans, off movement shooting. Caleb Foster, I'm still really bullish on him taking another step into his junior season. I love the mix, right, with Malik Brown and Gongba at the center spot. I think you can do some 5-out passing with that. I think I like Jon Scheyer's offense. So we've talked all about those things there. But there's a risk, too, with building a team that's this young, that doesn't have as many proven vets. And that's why they're just moving down just a tad now that Coward's officially singing the NBA draft and probably going to be a first-round pick.
I think that's fair. And here's what I want to ask you about, too, because I really like where they're at the center position. I know Malawach is gone, but I think bringing back Malik Brown, bringing back Patrick Ngamba, you've got a tandem that's experienced there. I like that. I think Cameron Boozer is going to be as reliable and as productive as any freshman in the country. Isaiah Evans, he's going to shoot it. I think he's going to be dynamic. I agree. Caleb Foster is going to score. My question is more about the connective tissue of this group. Like you mentioned Sion James, not only from the perspective of he makes threes and he is really good defensively, but he also embraced being a complimentary guy offensively. Hey, I'm perfectly content to just go sit in the corner. And if I get it, I'm going to shoot it or I'm going to move it. I'm going to, my touch time, if you will, is going to be very quick. And when I look at this roster, I see guys that are used to having the ball in their hands. The exception to that, in my opinion, may be the freshmen like Caden Boozer, Cameron Boozer, Nicholas Kamania. Those guys are all really good passers. And so I wonder if this team gets some experience. If we see the freshmen start to emerge into, I think Cam will be more of a focal point, but if we see Caden and Nick start to become part of that connective tissue, and obviously Dame is going to be hugely important as well, but I'm specifically talking about the ball movers. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I do feel like that was a underrated part of why Duke was so good this year.
Yeah, I think Sion James was also a terrific screener. And that part about it, his understanding of back cuts, his understanding of angles is something huge. I may even toss in Sebastian Wilkins into that mix too. You see some of the stuff that he can do, a late addition to this class. It's really exciting. And that's the part with this Duke team. It's the talent is right. And Duke's bet on talent usually makes sense. And their bet right now this cycle on retention, I think makes a lot of sense. But there's all these little things that impact winning that I'm just a little bit curious about. I still think Duke has maybe as high a ceiling as anybody in college basketball when March rolls around. But it wouldn't surprise me one bit if there's some growing pains early with this group as they just kind of figure things out. And plus, like, they also don't have like that elite rim protector that I think really negated almost any of their defensive issues at times last year. Like, say they made a mistake defensively, Malowacz, he blot out the sun, it felt like. I think that there's just a few more holes in this personnel than what it was, a few weeks ago when you were talking about Coward and how that could fit in and all of the vets and the little bit of like the veteran presence mixed in with the youth. Right now, they feel a little young and a little bit more fragile than I necessarily thought a couple weeks ago.
No, I think that's fair. Like, still Final Four, national championship contender, as talented as everyone, maybe a little bit younger than they would have liked. And again, we'll see if the connective tissue gels the way it did this year. All right, let's go to number 9. You have Texas Tech. And I know you were a huge fan of what they were able to accomplish this offseason, but break it down for us while you've got them inside your top 10.
Yeah, I love this team. I love the build of what they have. I love the ability to play multiple different ways. Christian Anderson's return paired with JT Toppin, who I think will be, a first-team All-American type of candidate for the second year in a row. It just gives them such a high floor. Both those guys are so dynamic, and I think they just crushed it in the portal. They're not going to win like a bunch of like the transfer portal recruiting rankings games, but all of these guys are great fits. LaJuan Watts is like the perfect Darian Williams replacement as like a booty ball 6'6" wing who can really, really pass. Tyree Bryan was one of the elite catch and shoot snipers in college basketball this year out of Santa Clara. You turn on a Santa Clara game, he just immediately popped off the tape every time. Donovan Atwell, another big time shooter out of UNC Greensboro. And then Luke Bamboy out of ECU, a phenomenal rim protector. So I love the idea of what Texas Tech can do as a team that can play big, they can play small. I am a little bit concerned about their number of ball handlers, right? Like behind Christian Anderson, there's not a lot of guys that have a lot of like pick and roll reps. Watts will help out with that at times. Maybe they use, a Toppin as like a 5-out hub a little bit more to try to negate some of that. But I think they could use one more piece. A name that I would watch is a guy that you and I watched very closely at the NBA Draft Combine in Ben Henschel, the Australian product. He has until June 15th to decide whether he's staying in the NBA draft or coming back to college. If he comes back to college, I think Texas Tech is a team to really watch there. And I think he would make this team like, I mean, if they get Henschel, I'd be talking about another 6'5" shooter who can handle it. It's like bar the doors. Like Texas Tech is going to probably be my pick to win the Big 12.
Just when you thought you knew everybody who would play college basketball, Trotter's got another guy who hasn't made a decision yet. This is going to be interesting. I want to dig into a couple things here because JT Toppin, I think, after that previous season at New Mexico, he exceeded expectations last year. Christian Anderson was someone who I thought made huge gains over the course of his senior season in high school at Oak Hill. And then by the time that season ended, I wasn't necessarily surprised that he was as good as he was last year for Tech. My question, though, is you talked about the limited ball handlers. It's a vastly different equation when you are the opposing defense's top priority every single night on the perimeter. And that's what Christian Anderson is going to be this year. And I think in addition to adjusting to that, he's also got to find the perfect balance or an ideal balance of between his individual offense and getting the ball moving, right? I mean, if he had, I think that was an area he showed a lot of growth in high school, but sometimes he was a shot happy guy. Now we've seen him evolve, but this is like a highly skilled guy who wants to score. So I'm curious how those two guys adjust to newfound roles because it is different, right? Anderson's he's got the X on his back is for the other team's perimeter defenders. And then JT Toppin, like he was a focal point last year, but it's a whole lot different when Darian Williams isn't next to you. So give me your thoughts on that a little bit.
I think it's totally fair. And I think, remember Jackson Shelstad kind of went through a similar thing at Oregon where he comes off he like as a freshman, just like come in and score. That I think they made it really simple for him. And as a sophomore, it's like, all right, am I a distributor or am I a scorer? Like, what's that balance? It was hard at times. And he had a couple struggles early in his sophomore year, then he picked it up down the stretch. Anderson, I thought Texas Tech did a great job with him last year, just keeping it simple. Hey, you're coming off the bench. Just go get buckets, big fella. Like he was awesome about that. This year, he's going to have to run the team more. Now, there are a couple games that I remember last year where Elijah Hawkins isn't playing well, and they gave Anderson the ball with his hands and let him run point guard and benched Hawkins. That's like the vision of what he could be. And he had really big moments in those spots. I'm excited about it. I also think Grant McCaslin does a very nice job of playing the matchups. He does a great job of isolating guys on specific people and not necessarily needing a point guard on the floor at all times. Like, that's where I think Watts's isolation brilliance is going to make their offense a little bit easier and not so reliant on, hey, Anderson, it's like Christian Anderson, JT Toppin pick and roll 19 times a game. I don't think that's necessarily going to be how Texas Tech attacks teams.
Well, and it's interesting too, because when they got Darian Williams, nobody thought he was going to be as good as he was. So they have really done well evaluating the portal. Let's move on to number 8. This is a team we talked about a lot on our portal show, and that's Louisville, one of the best transfer classes in the country. I am particularly high on their backcourt and the emphasis they put on accumulating shooters, both out of the portal, and then getting a point guard like Mikal Brown from the high school ranks is as good of a pure point guard as there was in high school basketball last season. What I want to ask you about, though, is the front court, because I think in the last few weeks, both in the final hours before the portal closed, and then even after that with some eligibility issues, I'm wondering how you feel about their front court and the depth of their front court at this point.
Even better than I did, a couple of weeks ago. I think Kaysen Pryor not entering the portal, not staying in the draft and choosing to come back is a big deal. If they can get him healthy, that's going to be outstanding for Louisville. Sananda Fru, a German big fella, like he's not a typical freshman, right? I think he's 22 when he's going to play his first game at Louisville. He looks terrific. And, you add in keeping Javon Hadley, who was one of the elite role players in the ACC last year, can pass, dribble, shoot, guard 4 or 5 positions. Like he's just a stud. And like that's the guys that they could have like rotating through this front court. You throw in Connie Roos, who's like a former, a ballyhooed recruit, and maybe they could get a good year out of him. They've added some more international talent. Like, Ali Khalifa is the big right now. Like, if is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be able to play? Like, they're kind of going through that process right now. I expect him to get that waiver. It makes way too much sense for him to get that waiver. And even if he gets back, it's like, man, they got 5 guys that I really trust at 2 front court spots. So mixing that with what they have in this backcourt with Adrian Woolley, who could come off the bench, Mikal Brown Jr., Ryan Conwell, Isaac McNeely, like Louisville is just absolutely loaded. I think this offense could be the best in the ACC. I think transition-wise, good luck stopping these guys. Like, it's when McNeely and Conwell are flying up the floor in transition, you're scrambling back on defense. You got to find 2 snipers like that who will pull from the volleyball line. Like, that's going to be really, really a brutal cover. I think Louisville has a chance to have a really, really special year.
Now, I've talked about how I love that backcourt and how I love the creativity that it can offer Pat Kelsey with the playbook, because he's got not only multiple playmakers, but multiple shooters and multiple movement shooters on the floor at the same time. And I'm just going to tell you, people, if Alifa is cleared and he's healthy, you have the chance to see some really special offensive type actions, because this guy from the 5 spot is an incredible passer. So you sort of put him in the type of spacing with the type of movement you could see with those shooters and the depth of those shooters. And I think they're going to be one of the most entertaining teams in the country to watch, especially on the offensive end of the floor. I'm really looking forward to that. But number 7 in your top 10, you're not going very far, because you're just going to Lexington. The Kentucky Wildcats. Mark Pope has built this one from scratch yet again. Tell me what you like most about this second iteration of the Mark Pope era.
I think it's way different. Last year I felt like it was a team where the system had to create shots for catch and shoot guys. This year it feels a lot twitchier, way more athletic, guys that can really create their own shots. Jalen Lowe, Otega Owe, Denzel Aberdeen, all 3 of those guys can go get one for themselves. And I think Kentucky's talent level isn't necessarily super duper high, but I think it's a lot higher than what it was last year. And they've added like elite perimeter defender in Denzel Aberdeen, elite wing defender in Otega Owe, elite multi-positional defender in Mo Diabate at the 4. If you could get, if you can get Jaden Quaintons on the floor at the 5, like that's another elite rim protector who can really guard on the perimeter. Like, I could talk myself into Kentucky being like a top 10 defense. And then I get Mark Pope's offense. Like, that's where the fun starts to begin. Full disclosure, I've looked at Kentucky as close to number 1 on my list. Like, I think this team is super deep. They have 2 of everything. They like in the air, and like right now, like College Wrestling doesn't have the COVID seniors, and they don't have like this extra senior class. So like all of these super teams that we saw the last couple of years have kind of dissipated, except at Kentucky. Like, they have so much more depth. And how do you weaponize that? That's fine. Like, your 11th man's better than our 11th man. That doesn't really matter in a big game. But I just think that there's so many different ways that Mark Pope can play. I think Jalen Lowe is going to have a huge efficiency bump, just like Otega Owe did, just like Lamont Butler did when they first transferred into that scheme. I think Denzel Aberdeen is going to step up and to have a bigger role. I think Andrea Jelovic, the kid that they've gotten from international, could be a huge impact player for them too at the 4. So it's like they're just loaded. They're loaded. And they have the best budget in college basketball, but they just have so many different ways that you can play. And I think being more athletic, having more of an emphasis on defense, and having more ways to score other than, transition threes, which was a big part of Kentucky's offense down the stretch, I think will give them a chance to really win the national championship.
So I'm glad you brought up the depth, and you said they had 2 of everything. I thought they had 2 of everything last year. Although it turned out they needed more than 2 point guards because those guys just injuries were, I think, ultimately the story of their season down the stretch. I think they have the same depth with better high-end talent. I'm not sure that there was a pro, like a bona fide long-term pro. I'm not talking about a guy who has a cup of coffee in the NBA. I'm not sure there was like a pro in last year's Kentucky class. I think there's a number of them on the roster this year. You mentioned Jelovic from Croatia, 6'11", inside out 4-man. He's on NBA radars. Jaden Quaintance is on NBA radars. He probably would have been drafted this year, but he wasn't old enough to be one and done eligible. Jalen Lowe, I talked about him a lot coming into the season at Pittsburgh. Wouldn't surprise me if he rehabilitates his stock a little bit this year. And even Braden Hawthorne, I'm not sure they're going to need a whole lot from him right away, but the upside is going to be there. And, like the Carter Bryant example too, like the Steph Castle example, you don't need to be the best player on your college team in order to be drafted. Sometimes you actually benefit from having a more confined role and leaving some things up to the imagination. So, Brandon Garrison, love him. So there's so many guys, Otega as well, who I think could be legitimate pros, still have to have a thing or two break their way. But this is a more talented Kentucky team with similar depth to what we saw in Mark Pope's first season. And I agree with you. They are a very legitimate national championship contender. All right, number 6 on your big board, the 6th best team preseason in college basketball is BYU. Now, our CBS Sports colleague, John Rothstein, has called this the biggest season in the history of BYU basketball. I think it's undeniable. Expectations are higher than they have ever been before. I'm going to 2-part question for you here. What do you like most about this team, and what are you most concerned with?
The thing I like most is that they don't have overlapping skill sets. Like Rob Wright, paint touch guard. Richie Saunders, off movement shooter who can get it going from the mid range. Kennard Davis, 3-and-D type of wing. AJ DeBonsa, what else do I need to say about him? He could be arguably the best player in college basketball next year if everything goes according to plan. And then Keba Keta inside, who I think is just a lunch pail type of big man who can protect the rim. He has scheme versatility defensively. I think you can play a lot of different ways with him, and he's just tough. So I love the additions that they have there that just complement each other in a really nice way. Now, I think the bigger question for me long term is they have nice pieces of depth, but do they have a dude coming off the bench? I think that's still a question mark. Mihajlo Boskovic is a guy I really like. You see him in the Big 12 tournament knocking down corner threes. You're like, oh, I could talk myself into him. Can Xavier Stanton become, a rim protector, 15-minute-a-game guy as a freshman? Is he ready for that role? Dawson Baker, Nate Pickens, Tyler Maroons, you go down the list. It's all right, do we have a guy off the bench that we absolutely trust? So there are some concerns with BYU's defense overall. I'm not quite as concerned about them because I think DeBonsa covers the floor at a great level. I think Kennard Davis has a new level he can lock into defensively as well, now that he's not the top of the scouting report like he was at Southern Illinois. So I think they'll be better on that end. But my bigger question is really more about the depth, and if this depth is actually good enough to be 8-9 deep, like a Florida last year where it felt like they had 7 or 8 guys that you could really, really trust in crunch time. Does BYU have that? I think the jury still remains to be seen.
DeBonsa's defensive upside is significant. He and I actually talked about it at the McDonald's All-American game. Listen, we moved him down to number 2 in the final national rankings. I thought he plateaued a little bit this year in his senior season, not because he's a finished product by any stretch, but just because, I think he just rested a little bit. I don't know that he had the same level of hunger. I thought it became more of a show than a competition at times this year, as they were traveling all across the country in North America from Hawaii to Canada. I'm really interested to see what Kevin Young's impact will be on Debonsa. If he gets, and I don't misconstrue it. He was still the number 2 player in the country. He still has a very legitimate chance to be the number 1 pick in the draft. Just needs a little bit of a course correction. And if KY can get him locked in and embracing being a 2-way player and embracing the competition over the show, stop worrying about where the darn camera is and worry about the scoreboard, and that's it. If KY can get him to do that, he will be the number 1 pick in the draft. He controls his own destiny. So that to me is going to be very interesting. And it's also going to have ramifications on the defensive end of the floor, because Rob Wright, as great as he is, and I think he's one of the best point guards in college basketball, or he's going to be, as a point of attack defender, that's a potential Achilles heel. And so AJ will really need to embrace all that defensive versatility, all that court coverage potential that he has, I think, in order to help protect Rob, just like I think Rob will help simplify the game for AJ on the offensive end. So it's all going to be very interesting, but certainly BYU is going to be a bigger show on the basketball court than they ever have been before. All right, let's go into your top 5. You've got Michigan and Dusty May breaking the top 5. Tell me about this squad. I mean, obviously Yaxel is there. I mean, where were they going to be if Yaxel went to the league? Let's start there.
Yeah, I still would have had them in my top 25. I liked kind of the build of what they had, but when you get Yaxel going, like, that changes the calculus a little bit with this group. And they've obviously added Elliot Cadeau out of North Carolina. We'll get to him more on him later. But the strength of this team is the front court. Like, this front court is not Florida levels, but Yaxel Lendeborg, Will Cheddar, Ade Mara, and Merez Johnson are a foursome that can really play. They're all different. Yaxel's like a pass, dribble, shoot guy. Cheddar is a big-time shooter from deep that can really pull from the parking lot. Merez is like one of the elite rim runners, awesome offensive rebounder, terrific on the glass. Ade Mara, post-ups, passes, just one of the most impactful per-minute players in all of the Big Ten last year. You have all 4 of those guys together under Dusty May. Like, yeah, he's going to figure this out. I think Michigan is going to be the best transition offense in the Big Ten. Yaxel can push it. Elliott can push it. They can really run. Amari Burnett's going to shoot a ton of threes. Merez rim running is going to be huge. And I think they're also going to be the best rebounding team. And what does this formula sound like? It sounds a whole lot like what Michigan State did last year as they won the Big Ten. They were the best rebounding team on both ends, offensive rebounding and defensive rebounding, and they just abused teams in transition. It's kind of funny that Michigan's kind of mirroring that type of Tom Izzo's blueprint. And I think, obviously Elliot Cadeau has to have a really good year and has to bounce back and kind of eliminate some of those horrible plays that are all over his tape. And Roddy Gale has to be better, and LJ Kaysen. And you can talk yourself into why this backcourt might not be good enough to get over the hump. But when you rebound, when you score in transition, and when you have these bigs, I think their floor is ridiculously high, and they also have an extremely, extremely high ceiling.
I still worry about turnovers. That was the Achilles heel of this team last year. They were very turnover prone. Elliot Cadeau, that's been his Achilles heel as well in the first 2 seasons at North Carolina. Yaxel is a total stat stuffer. He wants to start the break. Presumably that was part of the pitch. Come in and play that Danny Wolf role. But I worry about it. And I think that the potential lack of floor spacing at times could complicate the turnover issue. So it's kind of like what you said about Duke, in that the talent is there. The pieces are there. I think the pieces complement each other beautifully in the front court. I just wonder if it's quite as seamless of a fit when you start to incorporate their backcourt around them. I like them all individually, talents. I just think Dusty May is going to have to experiment and pull the right strings as the course of the season goes on. But certainly with Yaxel on board, every bit deserving of that top 5 ranking in Trotter's preseason top 10. Let's go to number 4. You have no longer the defending champs, but UConn has won 2 of the last 3 NCAA championships. They brought Alex Caravan back. They brought Solo Ball back. They got Silas Demery out of the portal, and they've got Terrace Reed back as well. Braylon Mullins out of the high school ranks. Trotter, is this 3 and 4 years for Hurley?
I mean, I was selling UConn last year. I'm buying them this year. I think this team's going to be awesome. I think this is pretty clearly my pick to win the Big East. I like them a little bit more than St. John's, and I think adding Silas Demery Jr. and Solo Ball, pairing him with Solo Ball, like that could be maybe the best backcourt in college basketball. Demery can really score at the mid-range game. His three-point jumper really evolved. He started to really put more pressure on the rim as the season progressed. Solo Ball, obviously one of the elite movement shooters, just like, I mean, if you give him a razor space of inch, like he is going to absolutely let that thing fly. Then you add in Caravan, who, I mean, when Caravan's like your third best player, I think that's where he's weaponized as an elite role player. Jalen Stewart, Jaden Ross, that staff is still really high on them. Terrace Reed, like I talk a lot about that year 2 transfer jump. I think he could be a poster child of it. I thought that times last year was rocky in his first year in Stores. This year, too, I think he's going to be like an Adama Sanogo type of clone where he's just a double machine and a real low post threat. So all of the pieces make sense. They've added really nice freshmen. Malachi Smith coming off the bench looks like a perfect 6-man for a team that wants to potentially go for a title run. But there's a big thing lingering right now, and that's Tom Thibodeau gets let go by the Knicks, and we just have to bring it up. Dan Hurley to the Knicks is something that I think a lot of people in college basketball circles are definitely looking at. I'm curious to see what your take is on that, just because it feels like the ripple effects of what that move would make would be pretty gargantuan for the college basketball ecosystem.
Yeah, I think the speculation is obviously, I mean, if you turn on social media right now, it's already happening. I think it'll continue until he says he's not a candidate. But I will say this on the surface, and this is I'm not reporting. This is no inside information. This is purely speculative. But we saw him turn down a lucrative multi-year offer from the Lakers last year. I think the two biggest drawbacks for that Lakers offer is that he would have had to relocate across the country. His family, his extended family, they're all in the Northeast. And I think he also was aware that, he didn't know that the Mavs were going to give him Luka Doncic, but, had he known, he might've changed his mind. But a year ago, it looked like the Lakers were kind of trending down and on the verge of a rebuild. Those are not the case with the Knicks job. I mean, the Knicks are built to contend now. They're built to contend for the next few years, and it is home. So I'm not reporting anything. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying the two biggest reasons he was perceived to turn down the Lakers are not valid with the Knicks. So we will see. We'll see where that story goes, but it's certainly going to be an interesting one to follow. And remember, like, this is a coach who has said openly that he does aspire to coach in the NBA one day. Now, I will say this. I think he's perfect for the college game. I love like the throwback type of accountability. I also really buy into we don't need less emotion in sports mentality. Like, we don't need to go down a rabbit hole here, but I think that's good for the game. I think Dan Hurley is good for college basketball. I think the reason, like he says, why is everybody looking at me? Well, because you're the most interesting guy in college basketball, and you also very well may be the best coach in college basketball. So you're huge for ratings. It's going to be really interesting, but I do think the situation is a little different than the Lakers job that he turned down a year ago. So
and it would be dumb for the Knicks not to call him. You make the call. He has X's and O's playbook that is the envy of literally any basketball nerd that you talk to thinks Danny Hurley's X's and O's are revered. So it would be dumb for the Knicks not to make the call, even though they probably should call Jay Wright as well too.
I mean, Jersey City's is that a subway ride? Is that I would have to check up on New York City Transit, but I don't know. I agree. I think there's probably going to be some sort of, whether it's back channeling or formal communications, there's going to be some sort of dialogue there. Jay Wright's the other name that we're hearing. Mike Malone has been tossed out there on social media today. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there and if there are any ripple effects in college basketball, whether it's with UConn or anyone else. Let's keep it moving. Let's go to this year's national champion, and that is Florida. And you have the Gators slotted as preseason number 3. And you said something earlier I want to definitely co-sign. Florida's got the best front court in college basketball. We said this last year. They had 4 starting caliber big men on their roster. And what is absolutely shocking to me in this era of college basketball is that even after winning the national championship, they were able to retain all 4. Tell me more about that.
Well, it feels like cheating to get them all back, right? Like you get Thomas Houck back, you get Alex Condon, who didn't hear that he was going to be a guaranteed first-round pick, so he runs it back, and Ruben Chinyelu and Micah Handlockton, and that just makes life so much easier, and it makes the roster make so much sense because you've gone into the portal and you've added Arkansas transfer Boogie Fland. You've added a guy like Xavier Lee out of Princeton, and both of those dudes are terrific off-the-dribble snipers. They can just go get one. And that allows Florida now to really unleash this front court, where I think Florida is going to be the best offensive rebounding team in college basketball. I think they're going to play big a little bit with Houck at the 3, Condon at the 4, Chinyelu at the 5. Let Houck show off some of his perimeter skills a little bit. That Houck Condon big on big game that they can do. I think they could do some inverted screens with them. I think they could do some 4-5 pick and rolls, taken out of the Michigan type of blueprint. You can do a lot with those type of guys. And while mixing in just being super physical, having awesome rim defense, and they need that, because I think perimeter defense is going to be a question mark when you pair Lee, who's like 6'4" and $180, and Boogie Fland, who's 6'2" and 180 pounds, right? Like you're going to have some questions offensively on the perimeter, especially when you lose like Elijah Martin, who's a dog on the perimeter defensively, Will Richard, who just lock anybody down as well on the perimeter. Like that's going to be a question. But yeah, this team's awesome. I think they got 6 pros on this team. Again, like we talk about NBA guys who's on NBA radars. I think Florida has 6 guys that have a legit NBA future, and not many other teams can say that. So I really trust Todd Golden in his roster building. This is a little bit different roster. It looks a little funkier. They're going to try some different lineups. They're going to be reliant on some younger guys to come in and play different roles, but they can ball. And I think Florida is the team to beat in the SEC.
And I would encourage fans to go back and watch our interview with Todd Golden earlier in the season, where he talked about emulating what he learned by competing against Gonzaga every year, playing with 2 bigs, and how it gives you such a high floor and the opportunity to have high ceiling teams every now and then. So the theory is basically, you have a consistently high floor every single season. And then when things click, you have a chance to have a really special team. Obviously, things clicked last season. They won the national championship. Again, I'm shocked that they have all of those bigs back. And quite frankly, that they could not only afford them, but also convince them that there was a role for all 4 of them to get the type of organic growth that I'm sure they were all looking for. The Gators are every bit a national championship contender going into 2025-26. One team that was not huge in the portal this year, but certainly won the retention game, is Purdue. And you have Matt Painter's club number 2 overall. Tell me why.
So Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Trey Kaufman-Renn, Purdue is the only team that got their best 3 players back in the high major ranks that made the tournament last year. That's saying something, right? In an era where like transfers are everything, like to be able to keep those 3 studs, it's just different. Like Braden, I could talk about Braden Smith playing point guard for 2 hours. He has every read just absolutely mastered at this point. He is a terrific initiator point guard. It'd be hard for me not to put him maybe number 1 in my top 101 players rankings that'll come out later this summer. He's just a baller. But I think I've been doing a lot of research actually on some of the other guys that Purdue has been able to add this offseason. I think they did a really nice job of addressing their holes. Like they couldn't defensive rebound last year, so they go get Oscar Clough, who's a really, really good defensive rebounder. Defending the rim was a real problem. Interior defense is a serious issue. They go get Daniel Jacobson, who I think like obviously they don't get him, right? They get him back after the redshirt freshman year where he basically suffered a leg injury in his second ever collegiate game. But he's 7'4". He can stretch the floor a little bit, but he's an awesome rim protector. I think he could be a starter for them. And if not, he's coming off the bench and playing a lot of minutes and going to be really impactful for them. And I would keep a really close eye on Israeli guard Omer Meyer. I watched a little bit more of him today. That dude can go, especially off the bounce. Matt Painter loves guards that can make pull-up jumpers. Meyer is 6'4", 210, looks like physically ready for college basketball. This team just really like filled holes at every single spot. Purdue is a team that early in the offseason I was like, I didn't want to be too high on them because, I think they're like 15th on Ken Pound last year or whatever. But like the additions that they've made just make so much sense for me. I think they have as few holes as almost anybody in college basketball.
I want to talk a little bit more about Daniel Jacobson. You mentioned him. Jacobson made a huge jump at the tail end of his senior season at Brewster Academy. And then last year he competed with the USA basketball team where that jump became much more evident. And this is a skilled 7-footer who kind of has a high center of gravity and a little bit of a narrow lower body. Wasn't always wasn't always the most physical guy inside, but we really saw things start to click. And so my hope is that that injury won't derail the progress, because if it doesn't, I think he has a chance to be a secret weapon for this team. They'll be able to play two bigs. Jacobson has a chance to be able to space the floor a little bit. So Trey Kaufman-Renn is still going to have enough room to operate. He's a massive lob threat. It would be the type of game-changing size that we know Purdue loves to leverage. And I think Daniel Jacobson, although he was on the roster last year, could be an absolutely huge addition to the rotation of Matt Painter this year. All right, Trotter, that leaves us with one. And I'm just going to say this. I haven't heard you say St. John's. I haven't heard you say Houston. One of them's your number one team in the country. The other one is not in your top 10. So who is your preseason number one team in the country?
Houston got a whole lot easier now that I got Milos Usain back. I was wanting this guy back for a while, thought it wasn't going to go my way, and eventually it does. As all good things happen, I just had to have a little bit of patience. And Usain's going to be a total beast. And down the stretch, he was playing as good basketball as literally any guard in college basketball outside of maybe Braden Smith and Walter Clayton Jr. Terrific three-level scorer, great size. I think that second year in the Houston program, he's going to have a chance to give JT Toppin a real run for Big 12 Player of the Year. Then they get JoJo Tugler back, who's also going to be a Defensive Player of the Year in the Big 12. Emmanuel Sharp can really play as a three-point threat and can also guard. And I think the addition of Isaiah Harwell is kind of going a little bit under the radar because Houston's going to be so much bigger on the perimeter now. They don't have to hide LJ Cryer, who was 6 foot, or even Pop Isaacs, who was committed to Houston, then popped over to Texas A&M when Milos Usain came back. He was like 6'1", 6'2". Harwell's a legit 6'6". So you give me Milos Usain at 6'4", Emmanuel Sharp, 6'3", who's built like a fire hydrant, and then Harwell at 6'6", along with what we know what Houston's interior defense is going to be with Chris Senek Jr. and Tugler. Like, look out, man. Like this group has a great mix of veterans, great mix of high upside NBA caliber type of freshmen. I think Kelvin Sampson has a legit chance to run it back for a Final Four because he's crushed it with retention, and he crushed it in the portal, and he crushed it at the Stare-Go deadline, and he crushed it with high school recruiting. And good things happen when you check off all 4 of those boxes.
Trotter, I funny story. I saw Coach Sampson on the road during the recruiting period, and I went over and thanked him for coming on the show, and I said, yeah, I'm sorry. I know I asked you all those kind of inside questions about your strategy and stuff like that, and extra possessions and giving up a lot of threes. And he smiles at me, he goes, I like you guys, Adam. So Coach Sampson, we like you too. You're Isaac Trotter's number one team in the country going into next season. Before we put a bow on this, Trotter, Rick Pitino is not in your top 10. Care to tell us why?
Honestly, just because of the additions, right? Like they would have been in the top 10 if Michigan didn't get Yaxel Lendeborg back. I think that would have been the group there. For me, St. John's is 11. To give you my St. John's little pitch, terrific defensively. I think they're going to be awesome in transition. I don't really think the point guard issue is going to be a problem for me. If Bryce Hopkins is healthy, obviously he's only played 4 games since New Year's Day in 2024, which feels like forever ago. If he's healthy, throw in Dylan Mitchell, throw in Zuby Ejiofor, they're going to be awesome. They're going to be really, really good. And I think this speaks to like the depth of the college basketball sphere right now. Like all 11 of those rosters can really, really go. But yeah, I think a lot of people are like, oh, St. John's doesn't have a point guard. What's the problem there? I just think they'll figure it out. I think they can play through alternate ways. And sometimes I think point guard play is a little bit overrated. If you can find ways to get 2 to the basketball, good things will happen for your offense. And it's Rick Pitino. Like that team's going to be just fine.
All right, I'm going to end with this. You have Trotter's preseason top 10: Houston, Purdue, Florida, UConn, Michigan, BYU, Kentucky, Louisville, Texas Tech, and Duke. Most importantly, the college game is in a great place from a sheer talent perspective. So regardless of what you think about NIL, whether it's right, wrong, whatever, what I will tell you is that there is more sheer talent in college basketball than in any season in recent memory. I'm not necessarily talking about, hey, there's multiple Cooper Flags. I'm just talking about there's the fact that St. John's is not in the top 10 speaks to just how good college basketball is going to be next season. Can't get here soon enough. It's going to be a terrific year. We're going to have fun breaking it down in the months leading up to it. As always, I'm going to do it with Isaac Trotter. You can find his work over on 247sports.com. You know what we've got there: recruiting rankings, wall-to-wall team coverage, transfer portal updates, the very best in basketball and football. And then, of course, every Tuesday right here on the 247 Sports channel, 4 p.m. Eastern time, you can find us for the 247 Sports College Basketball Show. We will see you next Tuesday. Until then, thanks for watching.